Hello and welcome back to Mini Reads. Today we will be summarizing the book How to Be Perfect by Michael Schur. Before we move ahead, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. Chapter 1, Should I Punch My Friend in the Face for No Reason? Michael Schur's How to Be Perfect explores the question of what it means to be a good person. In Chapter 1, Should I Punch My Friend in the Face for No Reason? Schur considers whether it is ever morally permissible to harm another person, even if there is no good reason for doing so. He argues that, in general, it is wrong to harm others, even if they have done something to deserve it. However, he also acknowledges that there are some cases in which it may be necessary to harm someone, such as in self-defense or to prevent a greater harm. Ultimately, Schur argues that the decision of whether or not to harm another person is a complex one that must be made on a case-by-case basis. Chapter 2, Should I let this runaway trolley I'm driving kill 5 people, or should I pull a lever and deliberately kill one different person? In the second chapter of How to Be Perfect, Schur considers the ethical dilemma of whether to pull a lever that would divert a runaway trolley away from 5 people and instead kill one person. He argues that while utilitarianism would suggest pulling the lever to save the greater number of lives, there are other ethical considerations to take into account, such as whether it is right to intentionally kill one person to save others, and whether doing so would violate the victim's autonomy. Schur ultimately concludes that there is no easy answer to this question, and that the best course of action may vary depending on the specific circumstances. Chapter 3, Should I Lie and Tell My Friend I Like Her Ugly Shirt? Michael Schur discusses the ethical dilemma of whether or not it is morally acceptable to lie to a friend about liking their ugly shirt. He presents 2 different ethical theories that can be applied to this situation: utilitarianism and deontology. Utilitarianism holds that the morally right action is the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Deontology holds that there are certain moral duties that we must uphold, regardless of the consequences. Schur ultimately concludes that there is no easy answer to this question, and that the decision comes down to a balancing of the potential benefits and harms of both telling the truth and lying. Chapter 4, Do I Have to Return My Shopping Cart to the Shopping Cart Rack Thingy? I mean, it's all the way over there. In Chapter 4 of How to Be Perfect, Michael Schur discusses the ethics of returning shopping carts to the cart corral. He begins by introducing the concept of moral luck, which is the idea that our moral choices can be affected by factors beyond our control. For example, if we see a shopping cart rolling away in a parking lot, we may be more likely to ignore it if we are in a hurry or if we have a lot of bags to carry. Schur argues that even though we may not be morally responsible for every single shopping cart that we don't return, we still have an obligation to try our best to be good people. He then goes on to discuss the different ethical theories that can be applied to the shopping cart question. Utilitarianism, for example, would suggest that we should always return our shopping carts because it is the action that will produce the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Kantian ethics, on the other hand, would suggest that we have a duty to return our shopping carts because it is the right thing to do, regardless of the consequences. Schur ultimately concludes that the best way to decide whether or not to return your shopping cart is to ask yourself what kind of person you want to be. If you want to be a good person, then you should return your shopping cart, even if it is inconvenient. Chapter 5, Should I Run into a Burning Building and Try to Save Everyone Trapped Inside? Michael Schur explores the ethical implications of running into a burning building to save others in Chapter 5 of How to Be Perfect. He introduces utilitarianism and deontology, 2 ethical frameworks, to help us understand the various perspectives on this complex issue. Utilitarianism holds that the right action is the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Deontology, on the other hand, holds that the right action is the one that adheres to moral obligations. Schur concludes there is no easy answer to the question of whether to run into a burning building to save others. The best course of action depends on the specific circumstances and our own personal ethical beliefs. Chapter 6, I Just Did Something Unselfish. But what's in it for me? In Chapter 6 of How to Be Perfect, Michael Schur discusses the relationship between altruism and self-interest. He argues that while there may be some selfish motivations behind altruistic acts, such as the desire to feel good about oneself or to gain social approval, these motivations do not invalidate the goodness of the act itself. In fact, Scher argues that it is perfectly acceptable to be motivated by both altruism and self-interest at the same time. He cites examples such as charitable giving and volunteering, which can both benefit others and make the giver feel good. Scher concludes that there is no need to feel guilty about enjoying the rewards of altruism, as long as the act itself is being done with good intentions. Chapter 7. Yes, I bumped into your car. But do you even care about Hurricane Katrina? Michael Schur, the creator of the TV show The Good Place, tells a story from his own life to illustrate the concept of whataboutism in Chapter 7 of his book How to Be Perfect, the correct answer to every moral question. Schur describes a time when he accidentally bumped into another person's car and then, when the other person started yelling at him, Schur responded by yelling back, "Do you even care about Hurricane Katrina?" Schur realized later that his response was a classic example of whataboutism, which is a logical fallacy in which someone tries to dismiss a legitimate criticism by pointing out the hypocrisy of the person making the criticism. The point of the story is that whataboutism is a poor defense against criticism, and it is important to be able to recognize and avoid it. Chapter 8. We've done some good deeds, and given a bunch of money to charity, and we're generally really nice and morally upstanding people, so can we take 3 of these free cheese samples from the free cheese sample plate at the supermarket even though it clearly says, 1 per customer? In Chapter 8 of How to Be Perfect, Schur grapples with the moral question of whether it is permissible to take 3 free cheese samples from a supermarket display even though the sign says, 1 per customer. He acknowledges that he is a good person who has done good deeds in the past, but he argues that this does not give him license to break the rules. He considers the potential consequences of his actions, such as undermining trust and setting a bad example for others. He also reflects on the ethical implications of taking something that is not his, even if it is only a small piece of cheese. Ultimately, Schur concludes that it is wrong to take more than 1 free cheese sample, even if he is tempted to do so. He believes that the rule of 1 per customer is in place for a reason, and that breaking it undermines the social contract that allows us to live together in a civilized society. He also recognizes that his actions could have a ripple effect, encouraging others to bend or break the rules as well. Chapter 9. Oh, you bought a new iPhone? That's cool. Did you know that millions of people are starving in South Asia? In Chapter 9 of How to Be Perfect, Michael Schur discusses the phenomenon of Schadenfreude, which is the feeling of pleasure or satisfaction that comes from learning about the misfortune of others. He argues that Schadenfreude is a natural human emotion, but that it is important to be mindful of it and to avoid letting it control our behavior. Schur uses the example of someone buying a new iPhone to illustrate his point. He notes that it is perfectly normal to feel happy for someone who has made a purchase that they are excited about. However, he also argues that it is important to be aware of the fact that there are millions of people in the world who are struggling to meet their basic needs. If we find ourselves feeling smug or superior to someone who has bought a new iPhone, it is a sign that we are letting Schadenfreude get the best of us. Schur concludes by urging readers to be compassionate and understanding of others, even when they make choices that we disagree with. He reminds us that everyone is doing the best they can with the information and resources that they have. Chapter 10. This sandwich is morally problematic. But it's also delicious. Can I still eat it? In Chapter 10 of How to Be Perfect, Michael Schur discusses the moral dilemma of eating a sandwich that he knows is ethically problematic. The sandwich is made with ingredients that are harmful to the environment or animals, but he finds it delicious. Schur weighs the pros and cons of eating the sandwich and ultimately decides to do so, arguing that it is impossible to live a perfectly moral life and that everyone makes ethical compromises on a daily basis. He encourages readers to be aware of the ethical implications of their choices and to make decisions that they can live with. Chapter 11. Making ethical decisions is hard. Can we just not make them? Existentialism challenges us to make ethical decisions in a world without rules or laws. Without objective good or evil, we must decide for ourselves what is right and wrong. This can be daunting, but it also gives us the freedom to create our own meaning in life. Sartre argued that we are condemned to be free, meaning we are responsible for our own choices, even if we don't like them. This doesn't mean we should give up on ethics, but rather live our lives in a meaningful way by choosing to do what we believe is right. Chapter 13, I Screwed Up. Do I have to say I'm sorry? Chapter 13 discusses the ethical implications of saying sorry, specifically when we have made a mistake. Schur begins by acknowledging that apologizing can be difficult, especially if we don't feel like we did anything wrong. However, he argues that apologizing is important because it shows that we care about the other person and their feelings. It also allows us to take responsibility for our actions and start to repair the damage that we may have caused. Schur then goes on to discuss the different types of apologies. He distinguishes between sincere apologies, which are genuine and heartfelt, and insincere apologies, which are said simply to appease the other person. He argues that sincere apologies are the most important type of apology, because they show that we are truly sorry for our actions and that we are committed to making things right. In the end, Schur concludes that apologizing is the right thing to do, even when it is difficult. He argues that apologizing is a way to show respect for others and to build strong relationships.